Good morning, everyone. Welcome. It is my honor to introduce to all of you Brianna Bear from the Songhees Nation and her son, Baby Bear, to welcome us this morning.
Ait squacho, good day. Asiam siait nishtalacha, asiam siait nishwalakwa, haichkasiam, Nakulia here, haichkasiam, lakwangantana, asa the eshlia, asa Gordy Bear, aka Baby Bear, achinasa lakwangan, achinasa kakakyak, and mami in Swiss. Achinasa lakwangan, achinasa kakakyak, achinasa creamy tea, and me in Swiss and Scottish. Essentially, what I shared in my language today was good day, my honorable guests and community gathered here today. My honorable friends, dignitaries here today. And just to add to a few of those words, I honor each and every one of you who hold titles within your respective communities, honor dignitaries gathered here today, people who traveled near and far to be here. We raise our hands and say thank you to our community here today. We raise our hands to the people of these lands, the place to smoke-carrying lands of the Songhees and Esquimalt Nation. The name gifted to me by my family is the Ehlia. It loosely translates to older sister. My name actually originates from our Wasinich side of the family in Saanich here in Victoria. My roots to the Songhees people are through my father, my son's grandfather, which my grandpa is Lahichala, Skip Dick, my grandma is Linda Dick, and my dad is Samet David Dick. And then I'm honored and blessed to have roots to the Kakwakiak Numgees people up in Alert Bay through my mom, which my grandfather is Norman Seaweed up that way. My grandma was the late Beverly Williams, and my mom, who's still here with me today, is Hatwina Pulagwa Leslie Seaweed. And then my son, Gordy Bear, Baby Bear here. He also has the same roots as me, but he's blessed to have roots to the Cree Métis people from Sandy Bay, Saskatchewan, from his dad, which his grandma is Carrie Murray, his grandpa's Bill Murray, and then his dad is Wapasku Muskwa, who is Gordy Bear. I share that introduction as a way to share who I am, how I'm connected to this community, the teachings that I've been gifted from my family. So in case you know them and there's something that I may have forgotten, you can always let them know. Now you know my story. And then I shared that I have a little bit of Swiss in me, and then he has Swiss and Scottish in him. We do these openings as a way to not only share the protocol of the lands that we live, work, and play on or are visiting, but we do it as a way to honor you and introduce you to our ways as Songhees people. Because we understand that in this day and age, we all come from many walks of life. We come from different communities, territories, countries even. Sometimes our families had immigrated here once upon a time, or we may have had to leave our homes because of education or because of work. And we understand that's a hard thing to do, to feel disconnected and away from home. And our way as people, we want to let you know it's okay for you to be here. We just ask you to walk gently on our lands. Be gentle with yourself too, especially after COVID, where we were all kind of just kept to ourselves. it put a bit of a heaviness on us. And to be back in community is great. It's beautiful to see all these faces in person instead of just a screen. And that I hope with today, each and every one of you are able to take something with you just as much as you're able to give something. Whether that's introducing who you are, where you come from, who your family is. My grandfather shared with us that when you share that kind of introduction with people around you, you share your connection to your family, to your homeland. And to never forget that, because no matter where you go in this life, you're still always connected to where your ancestors came from. You're just adding to the teachings that you're gaining now. And so with that, oh, excuse you. With that, me and Baby Bear, bless you, would like to say Haichka Siam, thank you for allowing us to open up this beautiful event. And we'd like to welcome you to the place to smoke carrying lands of the Songhees and Esquimalt Nation, and also honor my relatives in Wasinich too. And hopefully our paths will meet again. Haichka, thank you.
Welcome, everyone, to the 10th Livable Cities Forum. I'm Megan Meany. I'm the Executive Director of ICLEI Canada. Thank you, Brianna, for welcoming us to this land and for sharing your culture and your language. Thank you, Baby Bear. I traveled here from Toronto, which is the traditional lands of many diverse nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Haudenosaunee. I have a bit of Scottish descent in me as well, so we have that little connection. Through this conference, we're really striving to recognize our responsibility in advancing truth and reconciliation and how we can start to honor it in our everyday work. So I'm really glad to see so many familiar faces here today. From all across Turtle Island. We have people from all across Canada and a few from America. We know this is a really busy season for many of you. We've got elections upcoming in BC and in Ontario. And in Quebec, it's literally today. So thank you for going out to those advanced polls, all our visitors from Quebec. I imagine this is the first for many of you to be sort of back live and in person, meeting in 3 dimensions. Raise your hand if this is like your first professional outing in quite some time. Well, that's a lot of hands, more than I expected even. So we're gonna take it slow. We're gonna make sure everyone feels comfortable. Thank you for coming along for this ride with us. Over the past few months, the ICLEI team organizing this conference had a mantra that we repeated to ourselves all the time. And that mantra was, nothing that could have been a webinar. We knew many of us were coming back together for the first time after many years, and we wanted to bring back some of what we've lost in limiting ourselves to these virtual connections. We want to interact and to react. We want some conversation and some contemplation, and we want to feed off the energy of the other people in the room. So as we go about these next few days, please keep that mantra in mind. Nothing that could have been a webinar. The sessions have all been designed for you to engage with them, for you to be really active participants. The speakers certainly have a lot of interesting contributions to give, but so do you. And so keep that in mind. Otherwise, we would have just organized a webinar, right? So after all, you know the byline of this conference is Conversations for an Inclusive Future. We want to see you having those conversations, please. When the ICLEI team goes about curating the program for these events, we do so keeping in mind what we hear from municipal climate and sustainability practitioners on a day-to-day basis. Right? We hear about your successes and your achievements for sure, and we try to celebrate those with you. But we also hear a lot about your challenges and what you're struggling with. And this is really how we landed on this year's conference theme, Conversations for an Inclusive Future. Much of our focus over the coming days will be about how we can prioritize diversity, inclusion, and social justice as we advance climate action. What lessons can we learn from two simultaneously complex issues that unfolded around us over the last few years, climate change and the pandemic? The forum will look at important synergies between efforts to address social vulnerabilities exposed through the pandemic and efforts to increase climate resilience and achieve net zero emissions in communities across our country. Now, many of you LCF regulars will know that this is the third time we're hosted here in the city of Victoria. And that's in no small part due to the passion and conviction of Mayor Lisa Helps. She's been on council for 11 years, over which time she's had a strong focus on creating inclusive prosperity and establishing Victoria's role as a small powerhouse in the global economy. She's a great friend of ICLEI's, and I'd like to welcome Mayor Helps to the stage for some opening remarks.
Thank you, Megan, and good morning, everyone. I want to start by thanking Brianna for a heartfelt welcome. Isn't she wonderful? She's so warm, and she's not here anymore. Her and Baby Bear are on their way to playgroup right now, but they did take time to join us first, and I'm just so tremendously grateful to them for doing so. Also tremendously grateful to ICLEI for allowing us to be co-hosts of Livable Cities Forum for the third and final time as Mayor of Victoria for me, but hopefully ICLEI will continue to have LCF here and have a strong relationship with the city. I'm going to just speak about a few things this morning. We were asked as the opening plenary speakers to set the stage a little bit for what we need to do and think about, and also to comment on a bit of the current historical moment that we find ourselves in coming out of the pandemic. But I want to reflect first on the welcome that we received from Brianna and what it means to be, as a city government, guest government on lands that are not ours. And I've really come to think of the city of Victoria as a guest government. The real government of these lands are the Lekwungen people, the Songhees and the Esquimalt nations, and the 5 families that comprise the Lekwungen people. And so part of our responsibility as a guest government, and we'll talk about this in some of the sessions this week at this conference, means embedding local knowledge in our climate work, and in particular in our adaptation and resilience work. We know from everything that has happened, everything that the colonial state, the church, all levels of government, all orders of government have done to Indigenous people across the country as a result of colonialism. We know all of that, and yet there's a tremendous amount of resilience that Indigenous people across these lands show. And this conference is being hosted in the shadow and the afterglow of the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. And here in Victoria, and probably many of you across the country, attended events. And we, of course, held together the pain and grief of residential school survivors and those who didn't come home. And also here in Victoria and across the country, we just saw so much resilience, songs and dances. There was a really big powwow here in Victoria. And I think there are lessons for all of us from Indigenous folks about resilience. And I think that's knowledge that we need to take very, very seriously. So as I said, we've been asked as opening plenary speakers to set the stage. And so first I'm going to talk about the theme, Conversations for an Inclusive Future, and then a little bit about the current historical moment that we find ourselves in. It is really clear to me, and hopefully this is shared, from the explosion of equity, diversity, and inclusion work that's finally happening in all orders of government, universities, community organizations, with deep regret and apology to the historically excluded members of our community that it's taken us so long as a country, as organizations, as governments to even get to the start line. But here we are at the start line. And it's really clear that when we build organizations, communities, and climate plans that are inclusive of everyone's lived experience and professional expertise, and when we begin to shift power and resources, we build better organizations, communities, and climate plans. And that's part of what this week is about, to discuss what does a shift in climate and resilience and adaptation and mitigation planning look like when we take seriously diversity, inclusion, and equity. And I think it's really important for those of us in positions of privilege, members of historically included groups, to listen first this week. To make space for people who, because of systemic barriers that we have had a part in maintaining, have not had as much of an opportunity to share not only their lived experience, but also their professional experience and their knowledge. And I think it's really important for that space to be created this week for those of us who have had lots of voice and opportunity to maybe listen first rather than speak first, and start with curiosity. So that's a bit on the theme. Secondly, the current historical moment we find ourselves in is very, very complex. One of the things that I've been doing, because I'm leaving office in a few weeks, and I don't know what I'm doing next yet, and so I've been doing interviews with people, not job interviews, but my coach calls them network grid interviews. So I'm talking with people who I've worked with or who I might like to work with, and I ask them all a series of questions, but I've asked everybody one question, different questions for different people, except I've asked this question to everyone, which is, what is the biggest challenge you see facing us in the next 5 to 10 years? And what was really, really surprising is whether I was talking with a VP of a big bank, or somebody who works for a First Nation, or somebody who works in real estate, or somebody who works as a community planner. And they all said it differently, but they used words like, we're divided, we can't speak well together about difficult issues, we have to bridge the gap between two sides, being friends even if we disagree, and so on. So that is, I think, something that we need to take really seriously in the next 7 years out to 2030, when we're trying to make these big goals and meet these big goals that we've all set. How can we do our work in such a way that's going to heal this great divide and also help us to meet our climate goals? So first, governments of all orders need to keep investing and building infrastructure and creating good climate programs and good climate policy. Bike lanes, EV charging stations, zero emissions transit, home retrofit program incentives, and so on. And Minister Ma, in a moment, will probably tell you about some of the fantastic work that's happening here in British Columbia. So governments, as a very basis, need to keep doing the infrastructure work. And I know we'll talk more on intergovernmental cooperation tomorrow. But governments are not enough. They're not enough to help address the climate goals that we've set for ourselves and heal this great divide. The other thing that's not enough is awareness. How many people felt that if we only raised awareness about the climate situation, that people would start to act differently? I did. I thought, okay, all we need to do is show people. And if the last few years haven't shown us, between atmospheric rivers and forest fires and heat domes and everything. But one of the things that I've come to learn is that awareness actually isn't enough. And just kind of tangentially, I learned this through Janet Austin, who's the Lieutenant Governor here in British Columbia. And she did, this is tangential, but I'll bring it back to the point. She did a survey of British Columbians about their awareness with respect to reconciliation. And 70% of people who answered the survey said that they were aware of the importance of reconciliation, that they had strong awareness, 70%. Yet, this year, when we created in the City of Victoria a Reconciliation Contribution Fund to allow people to contribute a little bit of extra funding on over and above their property taxes to go to the Songhees and Esquimalt nations, I can tell you for sure that 70% of Victorians did not respond favorably. Probably 1% of Victorians responded favorably. And so we have this awareness that reconciliation is important, but when we come to action, the action isn't there. And as she was presenting this at a public forum, I immediately thought about climate. We have an awareness that climate change is real and scary and impacting people and communities negatively, particularly those who are already marginalized or excluded. And yet awareness isn't enough. So if it's not enough, if awareness isn't enough, how do we mobilize people for change? Well, that's why you're all here and why we're all here this week. I think that in addition, of course, to government building infrastructure and having climate policy, we need to start mobilizing people for change by creating small, meaningful projects in all of our communities in ways that not only address the issue, but also bring people together. And I'll just tell you very briefly about something that's happening on our street. And actually, it's the person who I live with and love and adore. She started a farm stand in the middle of COVID in our front porch. And I said to her, are you sure? Like, this is never going to work. And also, it's too small. You're going to bake 4 loaves of bread a day and make some soups and muffins. It's too small. And it was small. It started small. And I said, and people aren't going to come. Like, people they want to go to the grocery store. They don't, like... And sure enough, that she started in October 2020, and the farm stand is still going. And then she put out a list to sign up for her newsletter, and people signed up for the newsletter. And then she started last summer creating play streets, and put closed the street down and invited people to come and do DIY events and fix it yourself and resilience planning. And so the farm stand grew into play streets, and then this summer we planted a pollinator garden, and it was absolutely chaotic, and there were kids everywhere and native plants going in, and we thought, how could this possibly work? There were kids sitting in the garden bed when we were supposed to be planting it. And it worked, and the garden was planted, and now we have this Indigenous Heritage Project, which is a native pollinator garden on our street. And what's happened on our street, and I just use this as an example, is that people who didn't know each other, people who didn't have a sense that they could do something, were there and were together. And so if awareness isn't enough, then people need to be engaged to take part in something that makes them feel like they're doing something, make them feel connected with each other, feel connected to their place. And is this kind of action big enough? This might not be the right question to ask. The right question to ask might be, is there actually any other way? And if the answer to that question is not really, then we all need to continue to find ways, and you're all mobilizers, that's why you're here, to mobilize, create, and initiate small, inclusive projects at scale, nationally and globally. 10 million projects across the globe might actually get us where we need to go by 2030. So my hope is that each of you attending this week find inspiration and connection here, and that all of you and all of us in positions to create these projects and make these invitations to our community members, and many of you here are doing just that. So thank you for your work in your communities, and thank you for coming to Victoria to participate in these conversations for an inclusive future, and I look forward to connecting with all of you this week.
Thank you, Mayor. I look forward to seeing you as part of some of those 10,000 projects. 10 million, pardon. A lot more than that. So we're also really pleased to be supported here today by the province of British Columbia. And I'm pleased to welcome to the stage the Honourable Bowinn Ma. She has served as a member of the Legislative Assembly for North Vancouver-Lonsdale since 2017 and was appointed Minister of State for Infrastructure in 2020. She has championed issues in housing, childcare, education, and responding to the climate crisis. Welcome, Minister Ma.
Thank you so much. To start, this is not what it looks like. It's not that kind of event yet at 9 a.m. It is just water. My name is Bowinn Ma, and I'm so pleased to be with all of you here today on the territory of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, especially the Songhees and the Esquimalt First Nations. Really grateful to Brianna and Baby Bear for providing the opening words for us today. I'm also struck by how many of you, this is actually your first in-person professional event, which probably means that for some of you, this is the first time you've worn pants outside in a little while. Another reminder, I can see your faces. You can't just turn off your camera when you, so I can see you the whole time. As you heard earlier, my name is Bowinn Ma. I serve as BC's Minister of State for Infrastructure, and I know there's a lot of different terms that the word infrastructure applies to. I, in particular, work within the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. So transportation is where most of the work that I do centers. And I have to say that I know how difficult the last several years has been for people, for communities all throughout British Columbia. We, of course, had the pandemic, but it wasn't only just the pandemic, if you can say just, with something as significant as the pandemic. But we also, here in BC, had heat domes, we had floods, we had storms, we had devastating atmospheric floods and rivers. We have had supply chain challenges. We have had wildfires and droughts. We're experiencing inflation right now and more. And after such a difficult several years, I really wish I could stand up here and tell you that the worst part is over. But I think that we all know that that really isn't it, that the hard part is not over, that the storms, flooding, landslides, washouts of last year, climate emergency, they are really just getting started. For many, many years, climate change was talked about something as though it was something that was far off in the future, that it was a problem that our children and our grandchildren would face. But it's not. The climate emergency is here right now, today, and we're seeing the impacts right now, today. So what does this mean for us? As I noted, when it comes to my role in particular, the question of what climate action, climate resiliency, and livability for people means from a transportation perspective dominates every discussion. Excessive carbon in the atmosphere has changed our climate, and transportation contributes 40% every single day to greenhouse gas emissions here in British Columbia, which is why Clean BC, our government's climate action strategy, leans so heavily on the transportation sector to do its part to drive down emissions and meet aggressive targets to shift people away from cars. So some of our interim targets, as an example, by 2030, we want to see 30% of all trips taken by people across the province to be taken by walking, cycling, or transit. We want 40% overall across the province by 2040 and 50% by 2050. And we also want to reduce vehicle kilometers driven by 25% by 2030. Now, those of you who have some experience in transportation will know these are very aggressive targets. But they are targets that we need and we must hit. To help us lay out the plan to meet these targets here in the BC Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, we're creating a Clean Transportation Action Plan that we will be releasing next year. And some of the work that will form this plan is already underway, and you'll be familiar with it. For instance, we are expanding BC's low-carbon fuel standard to reduce the carbon intensity of fuel at the pump. We're developing a new emissions cap on natural gas utilities. We're leading North America in shifting cars away from fossil fuels towards electrification, and we're investing in green hydrogen fueling technology. We're expanding our rapid transit systems with the Broadway Subway Project and the Surrey-Langley SkyTrain Project, and building out more and more of our active transportation networks all of the time by incorporating improvements into ministry projects like highways, bridges, and tunnels, while also expanding grant opportunities for communities like yours to help with your local infrastructure as well. But here's the thing. We can build public transit. We can build AAA cycling infrastructure, electrify fleets. We can optimize commercial shipping routes. But with a growing population and worsening congestion and concerns about worsening affordability, it is clear that even with all of that, it will not be enough. We do not have the urban space to keep building more lanes for more cars. And given the true costs of construction and the realities of induced travel demand, we do not have the luxury of ever widening highways forevermore. And affordability is becoming as much about housing costs as it is what people are paying in time and gas to travel great distances to and from work. So again, what does this mean for all of us? Well, we're here to talk about livable cities, so let's start there. What makes a city livable? What makes a community livable? And what is the role of a transportation system in one? To answer this, I want to bring up a name. His name is, give me a second with my wine here. My morning wine. There's a transportation consultant named Jarrett Walker. He's based out of Portland. He's the author of a book called Human Transit, and he describes transportation systems as systems that facilitate access for people. So how he describes this is that in any given day of your life, you have a certain amount of time available to you to travel, to get to all the places that you want to be. And at the outer limits of the distance that you can travel is, just think about it in your mind, a wall. And beyond that wall are all the places that you cannot hang out with, all of the schools you cannot attend, the jobs, the physical jobs that you can't accept, the things you cannot do. It's limiting your ability to access what it is that you need on a day-to-day basis. So transportation systems being about increasing access to people, access to places, access to things, the people you want to spend time with, the job you want to earn money at, the school your child attends, a store you get groceries from. Now, if you notice, this is a little bit different than thinking about transportation as mobility. Mobility is very, very important. It is still important. I'm not saying throw that out, but it is a little bit different because it also begs the question, if transportation systems are about accessing the people, places, things you want to access, then what happens when we put all of those things really close together and then center them around transit hubs? What happens when you build childcare close to schools, close to homes, close to jobs, close to grocery stores, close to hospitals? How much money would your family save if you didn't need to operate 2 cars? How much more could you do if all of your activities were in close distance from each other? How much more time could you spend with your loved ones if you weren't spending 2 hours a day traveling to and from work? And for all the local leaders in the room, of which there are many, what would your city's greenhouse gas emissions look like if the residents of your community could walk, cycle, or transit to everywhere that they needed to go? How much more livable would your communities be then? Transportation isn't just about getting people from point A to point B. It's about building greener, more accessible, more inclusive, livable communities for people and their families, which is why our government has been making significant steps to increase transit-oriented opportunities, transit-oriented development opportunities within our Planning Together BC strategy. So Planning Together BC is a strategy that we're taking to deliberately collaborate across government, provincial government ministries, all levels of government, to integrate land use planning into our transportation strategy so that we can support the creation of more compact, people-centered communities all across the province. Communities that help people live closer to where they work, to their schools, to shops, to services, with better cross-community connections through sustainable transportation options. Earlier this year, we passed legislation to explicitly enable the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure to purchase land for transit-oriented development, so land for purposes other than direct transportation infrastructure around transit hubs. This is a huge shift in approach, and especially a huge shift in thinking for the so-called Ministry of Highways, and something that previous governments did not do. And we did this because it turns out that strategically acquiring strategically placed land for housing, for childcare, for schools, for community centers, hospitals, grocery stores, is a lot more relevant to transportation than it might have originally appeared. The best transportation plan is a good land use plan, and taking opportunities to reduce or even eliminate trips can and should be a part of a good transportation system. And of course, this is not something that can only be done through one level of government. We all need to lead and work together. And I'm especially grateful for leaders like Mayor Helps and so many others here who have made significant visionary changes, whether it's reallocating road space for pedestrians, cyclists, and transit, or saying no to yet another bedroom community, These are challenging and important decisions that are often made in the face of enormous resistance from those who fear change. But we must be bold in the face of the challenges before us. We must break down the silos that so often divide the way that we think about transportation and land use, and be unafraid to try new things. And always, we must keep our eyes on the prize, because when it comes to transportation, it's not pavement that we're after. It's about making life better for people in their communities. And I know that that is work that you are all doing every single day. So thank you so much for inviting me to speak.
Thank you, Minister. It's great to hear you speak with such passion about these issues that I know everybody else here feels the same way about. Now, Mary Rowe couldn't be here with us today, but we couldn't be without Mary. So we're going to zoom her in. You know, we couldn't let go of the technology too quickly. So many of you will know Mary as the president of the Canadian Urban Institute. She's also a leading urban advocate and civil society trailblazer who's worked with cities and communities across Canada and in the US. Here we go, Mary, welcome. She can hear us.
Hi, everybody. It's Mary Rowe from the Urban Institute. I just want the minister to see this. I'm wearing pants, Minister. Just so you know, just to make sure that I love the adage for today, which was nothing that can happen on a webinar. And sadly, I am the throwback to the webinar days, but I'm here in Toronto, which is the traditional territory of the Mississaugas, the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Chippewas, the Anishinaabe, the Wendat, peoples. And as you heard from Megan and Eva are based in Toronto, many First Nations, Inuit and Métis resident here in their ancestral territories, of which I am a settler. I am so sorry to not be with you. Believe me, who wouldn't want to be in Victoria with those dynamos that we just got a chance to experience? I very much appreciated that I was able to listen in and be part of it, and be able to hear Brianna and Baby Bear. And then, of course, to have the leadership of Lisa Helps. Lisa, wherever you go next, and I am one of those people that you've interviewed, wherever you go next, you're going to continue to make this remarkable contribution, which is grounded in the local. And I just want to say to Minister Ma, how wonderful to see such brave leadership coming from a provincial elected official. Tremendous that you are so committed to these causes. And I totally agree with you that transportation isn't just about moving things. It's actually the business that CUI's in. We're in the connective tissue business. So it's about how do you actually create connections and opportunities for interaction and especially creative problem solving, which is what all of you are gathered there to do over the next few days. I've been fortunate enough to be at a couple of Livable City forums, and I can't believe it's your 10th. Honestly, and Eva and Megan look the same. Just a wonderful, wonderful, prescient, prophetic in many ways gathering that you started 10 years ago to make the point that livability and resilience are completely interdependent. And now we've had a much broader understanding that we continue to have to build around racial reckoning and reconciliation. And I think about in December, believe it or not, we will have experienced 1,000 days of COVID. December 7 is 1,000 days of COVID. And at CUI, we're starting to focus on what is the COVID dividend? What are we going to take from this extraordinary experience of 1,000 days of having to improvise and collect ourselves in different kinds of ways? What are we going to take from that and make permanent, make it stick, and have it alter forever how we build communities? And I think of Friday, the National Day of Reconciliation, and the 94 actions in the Truth and Reconciliation. I have this right by my computer, the Truth and Reconciliation recommendations, and what an act of constancy this has to be for not 1,000 days, but 1,000 years. So this is not for the faint of heart, which is why this forum is so crucial. You get an opportunity to have these really critical conversations. You can see with the agenda how it's evolved over the years. The fact that you're doing equity, diversity, and inclusion, looking at the role of infrastructure as that binding investment that allows us to actually be near each other and co-locate and have all the creative experience that we have living in communities? And also, how do we actually make net zero general, basically? How do we take these things to the mainstream? So I just want to salute all of you that have been in the trenches for so long. I want to say I had a little shout out to my colleagues, Gay and Gabriella from the CUI, who were there leading a couple of sessions and talking with you about our experience being an intermediary on a really interesting program called the Healthy Communities Initiative, and how placemaking can actually make a difference. And just to echo behind Mayor Helps's call out to what she and her partner have been developing, you're absolutely right that all of this comes down to local action, to us demonstrating what works locally, to us being committed to how we can make connections that we can see with our very own eyes. And then how does that actually then get translated into more and more and more and more? A couple of weeks ago, I was at the G7 in Germany, where Eva and Megan's colleagues at ICLEI were very involved. A first time that the G7 has hosted an urban ministers meeting. And what was really obvious to me was all those national decision makers, policy makers are looking to the local. They're looking for what works. They're looking for what kinds of enabling conditions can they continue to support that will allow more and more and more of the kinds of initiatives that all of you are working on every day in your day-to-day lives. So I wish you a fabulous, fabulous couple of days. I'm so appreciative that CUI could be partnered with you in this way. As I say, I look forward to whatever Lisa Helps has next. And we look forward, of course, to hearing what comes out of the Livable Cities Forum. And you couldn't have anybody better than Farhaan, who's going to talk to you about the implications of the digital public square and how that now we're moving into another orbit, but all of it connects in the places where you live and work, and where you make your communities livable and resilient and equitable. So I wish you well. Sorry I can't be there, and I'm the only throwback to what could have happened if you were a webinar. Bye, everybody.
Thanks so much, Mary. We miss you. And so before I leave the stage, I want to take just a moment to recognize our platinum sponsor and our mobilizing partner. I know it's not cool to talk about money, but we can't do these things without, some money and some financial resources, and they've been very generous helping us put this together. So our platinum sponsor is Cooperators, a leading Canadian financial services cooperative. They're very well known for their community involvement and their commitment to sustainability. They've been a long-standing collaborator of ICLEI's. Thank you very much. And thank you to our mobilizing partner, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, our national voice of municipal government. Their Municipal Climate Innovation Program has helped more than 600 municipalities better prepare for and adapt to the new realities of climate change, as well as reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Both Cooperators and FCM are here and have staff here over the next 3 days, so I really encourage you to engage with them, seek them out. And with that, I'm going to ask my colleague, Eva Jackson, to come on the stage and set us up for the fireside chat. If you don't know Eva yet, that will soon change. She has a hand in literally everything to do with this conference. She's managing director of ICLEI Canada and a driving force in the world of municipal climate resilience. Come on up, Eva.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. It is so nice to see so many familiar faces, and I apologize if I've been running around like a mad woman this morning. I absolutely cannot wait to talk to all of you over the next 2.5 days. But a little bit more talking ahead here. If I could make the sound of a screeching record breaking, I would. I can't, so I won't, but I want to seize about something Mary had said on seizing the COVID dividend. I don't think we can forget about the digital. We may be all webinared out, but the digital is here to stay. And so we've brought a keynote for you now to keep us thinking in that space, to seize these conversations and to seize these moments of seeing three-dimensional people with pants on, and but to not forget about the digital. So as I introduce you, Farhaan, come on up, have a seat. Farhaan and I live 71 meters apart. We live on a very tiny road in Toronto, and it took a pandemic to actually bring us together. Our streets started a WhatsApp. This random initial F appeared. We just chat about a wayward egg that was missing that someone needed, or perhaps an emergency lemon to finish dinner. And that led to conversations while kids ran around in planter boxes or after their bedtime. And then we realized what we did for a living and thought, oh, wait a minute, there's something here. There's something juicy here. So as we were planning the forum, Farhaan came to my mind, and we thought there's something, the work that he's been doing with Digital Public Square was something we wanted all of you to know about and to think about and to talk about over the course of the next couple of days. So Farhaan is the CEO and co-founder of an organization called Digital Public Square, where he works with communities big and small around the world and right here in Canada. And I think the insights he can bring, though maybe at first pass sound like different challenges than what you're experiencing in your communities, the lessons are right there. So I invite you to think of questions. We have time for some Q&A after Farhaan's presentation. I have some, but I'm sure yours are better. So keep those in mind and join me in welcoming Farhaan.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Really grateful to be here today with all of you, to ICLEI for inviting me, to all of you for listening to me, and to Baby Bear for reminding me why these conversations are just so important. I'm going to spend a few minutes today that I'm hoping will help us address some of the challenges that the mayor put in front of us in moving beyond just raising awareness to combating division that fosters real understanding. I want to draw from the lessons that we've learned in a variety of places around the world. And I want you to remember, just as Eva said a moment ago, that this is actually about the local and where that action takes place. But we need to be conscious of the environment in which we are living, where we want that action to emerge as a consequence of the understanding that people have. And so I'm going to start my story a little bit far away. I'm going to speak from prepared notes because I love to hear the sound of my own voice, and otherwise that red card will be up early. I'm going to start my story in Syria and Iraq. It's hard to forget the videos that circulated in 2015 advertising ISIS violence. Some of you will have seen this. You've certainly seen it on the news. And if you dial back just a little bit, you'll remember the horror with which you saw the shock that was built into every single viral video that was spreading across every platform that we compulsively scroll through. These weren't just videos, they were memes, they were stories and viral posts, all curated to share violent messages that our social media feeds propelled to hundreds of millions of people around the world. Meanwhile, lost in the likes and the shares were the real people living through this catastrophe. I still remember the first time I saw an ISIS survivor tell their story. It was shocking just how far my expectations were from reality. Our team had set out to produce a documentary that featured Syrian women sharing their experiences at escaping violence in Syria. We had this elaborate setup to protect their identities, the fog of war type masking and the anonymizing of names, the censoring of identities. It was based on the assumption that they actually want to remain anonymous. We were wrong. Most of those interviewed were adamant that their real voice be heard, that their face be unblurred, and that their real name be known. We were prepared for them to share stories of loss and hardship. They shared stories of leadership and their fight for better education and opportunities for women. This community of survivors knew what the world was seeing. They knew what the world was seeing online, that it didn't include them, and they were hoping to change that. This demand for inclusion, to have one's voice heard, even in the most dire circumstances, is one part of a deeply rooted set of problems we've spent over a decade working on at Digital Public Square. We started as a project that grew into an organization that's now done work in some 20 countries around the world. So what's our job? Our job is to foster meaningful conversations, typically on difficult subjects, and oftentimes in challenging environments. I was asked here to come today to set the stage for the discussions that you're going to have over the coming days as you collectively grapple with the challenge of building an inclusive future towards climate action that reflects the views of far more people and how digital tools are an integral part of this. Over the next few minutes, I'll share with you my views on the state of the online world today, the challenges we face with toxic information on providing our communities with high-quality information, the impact this has on the actions we need communities to take, and how we might address those challenges even in the face of a global pandemic and generational polarization. I'd like to share some lessons that we're learning in hopes they offer a roadmap for how to think about an inclusive future in a way that harnesses the power of the online world. These lessons are relevant for communities big and small in each and every part of this country, from Vancouver and Victoria to Timmins. So when the internet was first introduced to the public decades ago, it offered what felt like endless opportunities to connect. Since then, the landscape of the online environment has become increasingly divided. Our social feeds and their algorithms have helped to foster some of our basest tendencies, resulting in insulated online groups where thoughts can easily be radicalized and drown out diverse voices. This phenomenon has made us all, each and every one of us, more vulnerable and contributed to a rapid breakdown of social cohesion, our feeling of connectedness and belonging in real-world communities. There are really great ways to break out of that, and Eva just shared one a moment ago about the way in which communities can come together, and I am sure that each and every one of you has stories just like that. But if we step back and think about the world in which each of the people in our communities actually live, we need to see it in the stark relief for what it is. We saw the extreme version of this breakdown of social belonging in the way that social media was used to incite genocide in Myanmar in 2017, in the proliferation of malicious actors using disinformation to undermine democratic processes worldwide, and the rapid expansion of conspiracy theories that divide and threaten public health in communities across this country and elsewhere. So how can we try to understand what's impacting social cohesion and our sense of belonging? Let me start with a couple of data points that might be useful. Less than half of the people surveyed by Reuters this year across 46 different markets say they trust the news most of the time. If you just take a moment, look to your left and look to your right, that's at least one of those people that don't trust the news most of the time. In a different study, 1 in 4 citizens say they don't trust the internet at all, and the vast majority cite social media as the leading cause of this distrust. And then there are the increasing number of people that are avoiding the news altogether. Can I get a show of hands from everyone in the room? How many of us has said to ourselves or our loved ones at some point through the pandemic, I just can't listen to the news anymore? I'd like you to look around. Keep your hands up. Just look around for a moment. Who can blame us? With the volume of news and information we consume that triggers fear and flight, we shouldn't be surprised that we've seen a sharp rise in the number of people avoiding the news altogether, in some countries, upwards of 50%. Yet we live in an age where we're increasingly dependent on the internet and social media for work, health information, transportation, communication, and education. COVID-19 was just an accelerant to a trend that was already well underway, where we're increasingly living much of our lives online. That transition has some features that are really troubling and that go well beyond the content that we consume and importantly impact the very ways in which we choose to work together to address our most pressing issues. For the first time since the creation of the Edelman Trust Barometer, none of the 4 key institutions included in their 21 study, government, media, businesses, and NGOs, were trusted by the majority of people. This has serious implications for social cohesion that could lead to further destabilization, conflict, and inequality. And in parallel, we're seeing global trends that suggest an increasing risk of deepening polarization in our communities. While we believe the impacts in Canada may be lower than elsewhere, we're not immune. In a study earlier this spring at the University of Saskatchewan, they found that nearly 3 out of 4 respondents felt that society has become more polarized, and about 40% said that they have reduced contact with friends or family over an argument about the pandemic or politics. The same survey highlighted that respondents in the prairies were more likely than in any other region to believe that the issue of fighting climate change was actually dividing Canadians. This issue of polarization has real and significant impacts in the world today. It impacts the choices that we might make, the people with whom we're willing to collaborate, and the desire to act on matters of great consequence. As but one example, in last Friday's New York Times, Max Fisher was writing about a recent study from Harvard about nonviolent resistance in relation to the protests that you may have seen online that are taking place in Iran. In the last decade, we've actually seen the power of social media used to help people find others with common cause, organize and then build momentum in seeking change in their communities, oftentimes through protest. We've seen this power exercised in the climate march and then climate strikes from 2015, and as recently as just a few weeks ago. Mr. Fisher makes a poignant example about the impact of polarization when speaking about protests. I'm going to quote him. In earlier eras, activists might spend months or years building the organizational structures and real-world ties necessary to launch a mass protest. This also made movements durable, instilling discipline and chains of command. Social media allows would-be protesters to skip those steps, spurring one another to action with as little as a viral post. The result is rallies that put thousands or even millions of bodies in the street overnight, but that often fizzle just as quickly. This triple threat, the rise of toxic information, polarization, and deepening mistrust amongst every institution in society, makes us increasingly vulnerable at a moment when the need for us to work in concert has never been greater. Just as digital tools have contributed to the acceleration of division and polarization, I believe they can also be reimagined to repair trust and create more inclusive societies. So how? I believe we must give people information and tools they need to become more resilient, whether it's increasing accountability, supporting healthy debate on issues that matter to them, or countering misinformation that otherwise is the will and the resolve to take action. The need for us to collectively create spaces that increase accountability and encourage healthy debate on each and every one of the issues that you are driving in your communities today is urgent. Now, I know that my opening comments painted a dark picture, but I'd offer a few glimmers of hope in the cases I'd like to share with you now. Let's start talking about the impact of toxic information online, why it's so effective, and what each and every one of you can do about it. And this touches on every single issue you're going to talk about over the course of the next 3 days. It's going to touch on issues related to transportation, on issues related to community resilience, on issues related to how we go about having conversations with members of our community. It touches on every component because we all live in the same online world. In every single community, we live in the same online world in this country. And as a consequence, these issues will touch the communities in which you are doing your work. So toxic information includes a range of false, misleading, and divisive narratives. It includes disinformation, the stuff that's intentionally produced and distributed by malicious actors, as well as misinformation, such as rumors, opinions, and inaccurate stories that are characterized as fact. So what makes it so dangerous? Well, it's designed to be exciting. It's built to take advantage of how each and every one of us engages online. In a world where we scroll quickly and mindlessly through large volumes of content, these false stories can catch our eyes with ideas that are provocative, entertaining, or surprising. A study by researchers at MIT found that false news stories on Twitter are 70% more likely to be retweeted than true news stories, and are 6 times faster to spread and reach 1,500 people than true news stories. The reason that false news spreads so much faster, deeper, and broader is because of its novelty. And when most people think of toxic information, they often picture, the artificial intelligence, the machines, the bots that are being used to create, fake news created by spies and foreign information operatives. Those tactics certainly exist. They're only a piece of the puzzle. People, public figures, politicians, companies, and even our friends and family are often the ones that are part of the misinformation distribution supply chain. I still remember weeks after the onset of the pandemic in late March, my family would gather together on these giant video calls. I'm sure all of you did this too. It was a phenomenon that I know that many of my friends and family also enjoyed. It was wonderful because it was a forced opportunity to connect with people that you haven't seen in a really long time or heard from. And so today, while we lament the digitization of the last 3 years in some respects, it was also a moment to foster connectivity and a moment that, come back to what Eva said a moment ago, that we do not want to lose sight of, because those lessons are integral for the world in which we live, which is now a combination of the online and offline spaces. These same calls were also a place to talk about the pandemic and the way it was affecting people and what was actually going on. Think about March 2020 and what we thought the pandemic was all about. On the call, I heard comments like it was 5G. It was actually created in a lab. The range of comments actually covered the watershed of misinformation that we know today to be patently false. These weren't agents of some foreign adversary. They were just regular people sharing what they thought was information that others needed to know, that was important for them to know so that they could be safe. It happens to be that they were sharing toxic information. Now, the internet and social media is often blamed for the rise of this, but toxic information has existed throughout history and has shaped important world events for centuries. What's different today is the speed and volume at which this information is being shared. And I want you to remember speed and volume, because we're going to come back to that when we look at that roadmap. On the one hand, it has the capacity to fully overwhelm us. And on the other, it's often designed to reinforce many of our pre-existing beliefs, fears, and grievances. This generation of toxic information is much larger, more dynamic, and really, really cheap to produce. The very same platforms that gave us a place to share whatever we want anytime have also designed algorithms that happen to trigger some of our most basic vulnerabilities in order to maximize engagement. It helps make us a little angry, a little frustrated, so we spend time on that page. Those are not the emotions we need when we're thinking about constructive dialogue to solve our problems. So early in January 2020, our team actually detected that we were seeing a lot of this misinformation traveling across social media around the virulence and cause of the pandemic. The threat to public health was really clear, and we knew that people urgently needed a better way to explore information about COVID-19 on their own terms. After considerable research, we launched something called It's Contagious. Looks like a game, feels like a game, it's not a game. And it's intended to help combat common and evolving myths around COVID-19. On It's Contagious, people across Canada tested themselves against a series of true-false questions, providing well-researched, accessible information about COVID-19 through a learning process incentivized by gamification. We use this space to correct misconceptions in a low-pressure environment that encourages people to think critically about their exposure to toxic information. Nearly 200,000 people engaged on the platform throughout Canada. This wasn't only in big cities, but people in towns and communities across the country. In a series of tests, what we call randomized controlled trials. You guys have heard of blue pill, red pill. One's the thing that's supposed to make you better, and one we don't know what it actually does, or not supposed to do anything, sorry. We applied that in digital space. And what we learned was that we could actually improve knowledge. A significant 15% of people actually learned as a consequence, or grew their knowledge as a consequence of engaging from 3 to 5 minutes. We learned that we could build resilience to that new information, 86% growth, meaning people remembered what they were learning. We found that the impacts were most pronounced in the most vulnerable communities. We know that political ideology is a good predictor of belief in misinformation. What we saw was left and right coming together on a basic set of facts. And finally, we learned that we were having a statistically significant improvement on the adoption of the COVID-19 vaccine subsequent to engagement on the platform. If we think about this as one of the most divisive issues we've seen in our time, and one that has an immediacy of response, that feedback loop is very quick. How do we help people overcome those distances of division in simple, effective, but meaningful ways? That's one example where we found that gamified experiences were an effective way to combat toxic information. People experience it on their own terms, competing against no one but themselves. And they arrive at their own conclusions rather than being influenced by the likes and comments of family, friends, peers, and strangers on the internet. When you take a quiz, you're always expected to get something wrong. Not knowing an answer to a question and guessing incorrectly won't have an impact on how you're perceived by your social circle. What we're learning now in our work with equity-seeking groups is that designing for inclusion means adapting the way we're addressing these issues with each and every community. It means creating space for perspectives that don't just have a single truth, that we need to break out of a binary true or false paradigm, incorporating spoken word, where it might be accorded more value than the written word, and finally, taking a hard look at the sources of truth that communities trust. Think about this in the context of climate action, the very personal responsibility that we need people to feel, the direct relationship to the choices that they make every single day. If they can't trust the information around them on which to base their decisions, how can we expect them to take positive action? The fact that we can rapidly collect these insights, adapt our approach as a result of purposeful listening at the community level, and then measure the effect of the changes we're making allows us to harness the power that digital tools afford us. Ultimately, this allows us to better meet communities on their terms, pull them into a conversation rather than broadcast messaging towards them, and to do so at scale in the way that helps to build trust. So what does a game about COVID-19 teach us about driving an inclusive future on climate action? Let me finish with just 3 ideas that might offer a bit of a roadmap. 1, listen with purpose. We must do better at trying to understand what drives the decisions that people make and how new information impacts those choices. Digital tools offer a wonderful opportunity to listen more intently and to better understand the challenges that your community faces so you can reflect this back to them in ways they recognize. 2, one more show of hands, please. How many people in this room use social media as their principal means of fostering conversations on climate action in their communities? That's good news. That's very good news. And it feels like the second lesson is one that many have already learned then, and that's to stop broadcasting and start engaging. We need to recognize that simply broadcasting information that we want people to know and wish they would understand could actually be making things worse. Recognize that we're operating from a trust deficit and that pushing ideas on people is likely creating blowback that you're not even measuring. Digital tools afford us an opportunity to create genuine moments of discovery where people can be drawn into a conversation to then take action at the very local level, which does indeed ladder up to impact at scale, as we just heard a few minutes ago. And finally, design for inclusion. We need to come to terms with the fact that many people are being left out of the conversation. In recognizing this, we can design better ways to engage communities where they are. This means co-creating or participating in spaces where they feel in control, where the language reflects their voice and that of their community, and where they are invited to participate by those they trust. Digital tools offer an enormous opportunity to rapidly learn where these design choices are successful and where they need improvement. The power of that data is enormous at helping to foster trust. Doing these 3 things, and I know it's not easy, and each of them requires hard work, are essential to delivering on the very effort that this conference intends to ignite, namely to increase climate resilience and foster stronger communities that will be at the very heart of this resilience for decades to come. Each of these can be done in every single community at every step of scale, from those that are in the hundreds to those that are exponentially larger. If we can ignore the allure of the easy checkmark of having consulted one community or another, if we can harness the capabilities that technology affords us to reach people who are often left out of the conversation, and to do so in a manner that better reflects their needs, we can genuinely foster meaningful conversations that I believe have the power to improve the quality of life of every single person in each and every one of the communities represented in the room today. We have evidence these approaches work in some of the most challenging places in the world and on our most pressing issues. I couldn't imagine a more hopeful place to start than this room today. Thank you very much. Yeah.
So I asked you to have your questions ready. I'll give you a little bit of thinking time by asking one of my own. And then I think we've got 2 folks, Hiba and Robert there, with a roving mic. So just raise your hand, I'll head over to you, and you can ask your burning question. So Farhaan, I'd like to start with something you just said on size and scale. A lot of our communities, well, actually in Canada, we only have a handful that are really large urban centers, hundreds of thousands of population. And I'm wondering if you could, sort of share, for someone who's coming from a small community, they don't have a chief digital officer, they don't have 10 staff working on communications, they may not have 10 staff working for the municipality. How they could harness some of your learnings in the work that they're doing, in that they are taking deep action on climate. But what can they do to harness the digital space for that?
It's a great question. And it's one that small communities certainly suffer from, that challenge, but so do big. In fact, all communities do. And I think part of the problem is for so long we have characterized these digital tools as communications efforts. They're ways of communicating information to people. And the challenge with characterizing it in that one basket is that it's far more powerful than that. If you think about this from the perspective of consultation and how many times any community will consult with any municipality will consult with its community on any number of issues, that to me is the basic framework for how to think about engagement. It's part of the full life cycle. It's not one moment in time where you're going to build a plan and deliver it. It's not one moment in time where you have to capture some feedback on one small component. It's not one moment in time where you want to be able to tell people about the accomplishments. In fact, it's a full life cycle of engagement with members of communities. Now, if you're a small community that doesn't have a chief digital officer, that's actually even more powerful because the same tool can be used for each and every one of those purposes. That same tool can be used to collect the views and opinions of members of the community, to feed back to them what you've learned, to be able to communicate the decisions that you've taken, to be able to then foster a conversation about those choices, all in the same place. And what it takes, I think, is a purpose and a desire. It's not about money, and it's not about headcount or human resources, but a desire to genuinely engage people throughout the full life cycle of the process. And then being able to leverage digital tools is a massive accelerant in being able to do that. I would argue, and I'd put a challenge to people in this room, it actually saves you time and it saves you money, not the other way around. And so if we think about it from that perspective as a full life cycle, at thinking about how to take those three lessons, how to listen more intently, how to be able to package that into engagements that are constant and ongoing, and how to design for inclusion from the front, right at the beginning. That's more time up front that I think pays significant dividends for every stage of the process thereafter. And the amount of time and energy you'll spend on every step thereafter, I think massively reduces.
So avoiding that desire to have the checkbox at the end.
Correct.
But build it in from the beginning.
Right from the get-go.
Thanks. I'm going to turn over for a hand. Now, I feel like you folks are sitting on your hands now just to avoid being held. Oh, I see someone there. Thanks, Hiba.
Hi, thanks very much for your presentation. I think at one point you said that we all live in the same digital community. And I don't actually know if that's true because I think the algorithms have customized, the ads that I see, the content that gets pushed towards me. So I just was curious to hear you comment on that because sometimes it's like the people that need to see or engage with, say, your game just don't ever get it in front of them.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we live on the same internet, but our experiences are vastly different from one another precisely for that reason. And I think that as a consequence of that, because it's the same internet, meaning that one individual might experience one little slice of that internet while at work, they'll experience another little slice of that internet while at home, they'll experience a third little slice of that internet when they're with their members of their community and the volunteer work that they do. That's still the same internet, but it is very different conversations that are taking place. And so our job is to figure out how to penetrate each of those in the narrow bands in which people increasingly live. And so it is the same internet, meaning that the power you're afforded to access those communities is incredibly high. But the consciousness with which you have to do it, because you need to understand that those spaces do exist, and it's our job to actually go there, is, I think, part of the challenge, and very much possible because it's the same internet, but it requires a different mindset to be able to then go and find those people in order to actually meaningfully engage with them. So you're absolutely right. We do live in these increasingly smaller and increasingly calcified communities that are getting more rigid and harder. That polarization is taking increasing root. It's why it forces us to actually decide if we're going to cross that Rubicon and go into those communities as part of our intention. Meaning, we've designed it from the front end, we've recognized that they live in these different communities, we're going to go and engage them in the communities in which they live, and that's a choice right from the beginning, so that at the end of the process, you're not asking yourself, who did you leave out?
I thought I saw, now the hands come up.
It takes 8 seconds, apparently.
Okay, 8 seconds is what it took. So we've got one there, and then I think there's a gentleman at the back of the room, and then another hand there. Okay.
Hello, yeah, very interesting conversation. I'm just curious, you mentioned about durability.
Yeah.
And I think really this is one of the biggest issues that we're facing, is that climate change requires us to meet our net zero targets forever, you know? And and what I see and what we see in our municipality is, you know, communities forming around ad hoc issues, the issues dealt with, and it goes away. So I'm just wondering if you could speak to that, that idea of durability and culture shift as not just one-off kind of events.
Absolutely. I think what we're seeing, and that quote from Max Fisher, I think is really important in this context as well, because the durability is the challenge. That the online space makes us feel like we're contributing by retweeting or sharing something. We have that momentary dopamine hit of, I did something. And it feels really good. And it feels like we've accomplished something meaningful, and you can go on the rest of your day feeling like I contributed. The challenge is it's totally effervescent. And the real work is changing your behaviors and changing how you live every single day as a consequence of what you've now learned from that initial participation. So durability is a real problem, because the way in which we feel immediately after taking that momentary action is really good. It doesn't last very long. And those repeated actions decreasingly feel as meaningful. And so my comment on how to address that issue, how to actually foster and mobilize durable movements, has to do with helping people find common cause. Meaning it's going to be 15 different communities that care about 15 different issues, and some of those are actually going to overlap. And what we find is that as those interests overlap, as people then combine and identify others with whom they think that they might want to work, with whom they believe they've got similar objectives or goals, that over time improves the likelihood that they'll continue to work together. They'll continue to collaborate on whatever the initiative happens to be. They'll continue to motivate one another. And when someone is like, I don't really want to support that particular issue or that particular cause at this moment for some reason, they'll cajole one another into actually doing it and find reasons to be able to convince them that they should continue to participate. And I think that it's no more important than on climate than any other issue, because the challenge of the feedback loop is enormous. Look, we had a moment with the pandemic where you could walk around and tell people, if you take this jab in the arm, you're going to live. Just go tomorrow and get a jab in the arm and you're going to live. And that feedback loop was really quick. It happens today, you get a jab tomorrow, you're going to be fine the next day apparently. Or the day after that or the day after that. Either way, you understand very quickly the response to that jab in the arm. And then we tell people that 30 years from now we're going to pay significant consequences for actions that you take, large or small today. And that feedback loop is much more difficult for people to really grip onto and understand. It's why fostering connections between communities of like-minded interests is such an important way to address this issue of durability, so that we can work more collaboratively and convince one another that we need to continue to act in pursuit of those climate objectives. Otherwise, it's too easy to say, I did my part today.
I thought I saw a hand. I see one hand here. So Brett, can we get a mic here to the third table in the middle?
I think I'm the next one.
Oh, I'm sorry, you already have a mic.
By virtue of open microphone.
Sorry, you already have it, perfect.
I know, we're all new to it. We can't raise our digital hands right now. Everybody out there.
There's no cue.
There's no cue. Yes, that's right. But number one on the queue. Thank you very much for the enlightening information on a very controversial and polarizing topic of social media and the internet use. My question is kind of around that easy checkbox. And you see the easy checkbox a lot in the digital space, I feel, in the terms of like, oh, we're going to hire a consultant to consult for a thing, a widget or a program or something, right? Yeah. Community engagement while you're undergoing your RFP bid evaluation. We suggest using a digital survey for community engagement, a custom digital survey. Okay, cool. But how does it address the socioeconomic, cultural, all kinds of these factors that contribute to what literacy, literal literacy, technological literacy, availability, access? So at what point in time does we'll just do an online survey become the easy checkbox and really take over the analog side of like pounding the pavement and getting real places with real people and trying to like actually capture voices, thoughts, opinions, feelings on things that are important to the community. So that my question, I guess, to summarize Cole's notes, how do you balance the easy checkbox of like, statistically speaking, most people will be able to access, most people have a smartphone, most people can do, but not all. It's not, so you are missing voices. So how do you address that?
So I don't think I have an hour, right?
We have 3 minutes.
Okay. So I'm going to make 3 quick points. Number 1, you can't. It's not a binary choice. It can't be either or. In order to genuinely meet communities where they are, you're going to have to do both. The power of the in-person in combination with the digital is that you can change your own behavior around the types of questions you're asking, around how you ask those questions, and about the issues you're asking specific communities to provide feedback on. Because the digital world allows you to collect that insight and then adapt the way that you are framing whatever that exercise happens to be, whether it's part of a procurement or a planning exercise or a end of cycle community engagement for validation. Every single one of those face-to-face engagements can be better improved by focusing them on the issues that matter to the specific community that you seek to engage. The digital tools that allow you to collect some of those views and opinions, and let's get away from surveys and talk about tools that actually allow you to assess trade-offs, understand how people really feel about issues, and hold multiple ideas in their head, which might be sometimes complex, but easier to distill in short bite-sized chunks. All of those insights can be used to foster better face-to-face engagement, and conversely going the other direction. So I don't think it's a binary choice. I think you have to do both. I think if you're going to genuinely meet people where they are, you have no choice but to do both. But that by integrating those 2 pieces together as part of a coherent whole, you are much more likely to be effective at collecting the genuine views and opinions of people and how they feel about the issues that matter to them in ways that can change the way that you behave. We're going to do a workshop after this in one of the rooms. We're going to talk about a case study where we did exactly that in a small community in Toronto that goes well beyond a survey or a poll, but really starts to understand how equity-seeking groups in that community that weren't typically included or didn't feel included in parts of the process that were underway for several years before differed in their views and opinions from others that were more likely to be present in the forms of community engagement that were taking place. And we can look at the data that tells us how the decisions that the community was taking were affected by what they were learning as a result of the way in which these equity-seeking groups are being consulted. So we can talk at length about how to do that part of it, but I would say it's not binary. You have to do both. One can absolutely influence the other, and collectively, as a result of doing both of those things, you establish more enduring relationships with members of the community that go well beyond whatever that one process is.
So before we wrap up, just a few housekeeping things before I thank you, Farhaan. And one is that there are a number of sessions that are exploring this over the coming days. Farhaan mentioned the workshop we're doing with our friends at Evergreen, whom I saw a few of downstairs, to give people a hand to chew through some of these issues. But there's a number of sessions on at the same time. We are going into a coffee break now. Before we do, we didn't do a printed program. Mainly, we didn't want to pull our hair out trying to design it. But in the era of non-printing, there is a conference app. It's called Whova or Wova, depends on who you talk to. They pronounce it differently, but you can download it, and then you just it'll prompt you to put in the event that you're at. If you're having difficulty, head to our team at the registration desk. They can help you. And the signage around the building will tell you where each room is. So if you are having difficulty, there is still the large monitors around. At the coffee break, you may have seen this question that's on the monitor now. And Tanya Gadsby is downstairs with the big graphic facilitation board. And one of the things she's trying to do is capture your thoughts on what's one thing you can do today to build an inclusive future. So at the risk of checklisting, we want to give ourselves some actionable things that we can do while we're here and that we can do while we go back to our communities. So please feel free. That question will pop up on the app and you can type your answer there or have a chat with Tanya while you're having your coffee downstairs. Sessions start up again at 10:30. Our corrallers will corral you to rooms. All the session rooms today are downstairs, so we won't be coming up here again today. And then we will move on from there to our afternoon of getting to know the city. So before we go to coffee, Farhaan, thank you. We had to travel across the country to actually be able to sit down together, but we did it. Please join me in thanking Farhaan for his really interesting and thought-provoking talk.
Thank you.